Welcome to another episode of Teen Minds Redefined, where we strive to redefine how we support our teens, how we communicate, and how we foster their growth and authenticity into being their own true selves as an adult. And today I have a beautiful guest, Carrie Bonnett, who is a veteran teacher and lifelong list maker. She is an executive function coach based in Bend, Oregon, where she lives with her husband and 2 children. Carrie works with students and families all over the world. Her no-shame approach and the strategy she teaches empower students to thrive in school and in life, help parents and teachers to better support their children, and help adults get on top of all that life requires. And I love that. In addition to coaching, she's also an adjunct instructor for early career teachers at the University of Portland, Oregon. I love that.
That's really fun too. We can talk about that if you want.
Well, we can start. Is there anything you want to add before we get going?
I don't think so. I mean, that as I listen to that, I sort of go, "Oh yeah, that's what I do."
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
So let's start off with, some people have absolutely no idea what executive functioning is. So can we start with that definition
I think that's a great choice. I wish we had a different term for this thing, executive function, but this is what we have. This is what the brain science world has called these skills. So the simple definition that I like to give is executive function skills are those brain skills that help us get our stuff done. So that's the simple definition, but there's much more to it, right? Like you and I both know first of all, it's not just school skills. We'll get to that in a minute, but life skills, like getting your things done, requires things like time management, requires some planning, requires organization, some self-monitoring, things like prioritizing. Sure, now you made a plan, but how do you figure out what to do first? What's most important? So those are the types of things we're talking about when we talk about executive function. Oh gosh, task initiation. That's like getting started. That's one of the things that of all the people who come to me for coaching, I would say many of them, task initiation, like the boring stuff, getting started on the boring stuff is so hard. So those are the kinds of skills we're talking about. If I had to rename it, somebody asked me at a teacher training recently, like, well, what would you call it? And I was stumped because I'm not quite sure what I would call it. I wish just there were a different name, because executive function makes me think of like a CEO of a company or something.
Exactly. And if you don't have those skills, you'll never be that person.
Well, which is
100%. I think that all the time.
I think where it comes from is because to do a task is to execute a task. I think that's where it comes from. But you're right. A lot of people probably haven't heard that term.
Yeah. And is executive functioning, is it part of a diagnosis, or is it part of, this is just something I have a deficit in? And if we say executive functioning, it sounds like an umbrella term for me for all of these different categories.
Yeah.
And if we have 1 out of 5 categories, is that still a weakness in executive functioning, or do we have to like check a few off the list before we say, this person is really struggling with executive functioning, period?
I mean, I almost think it doesn't matter how many things a person, I mean, to back up and answer to your question, every human has executive function skills. Some of them are more pronounced. For me, this is something that is a strength for me. That's where I come at this work. Not all coaches do. But I come at it, so these are strengths for me and how to help and teach that. So we all have to deal with executive function. But in answer to your question about a diagnosis, it won't come as a surprise to you that many, many of my clients have some sort of diagnosis, like ADHD or autism, some dyslexia there too. So all these learning differences cause, and the term dysfunction is out there. I don't love it. It seems negative to me. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit too, the negativity and shame around this stuff. But it almost doesn't matter. What I've been hearing lately out in the world of ADHD is that's really what ADHD is, though, is a executive dysfunction, like a real challenge with executive function. And so not all of my clients have any kind of diagnosis, because we all struggle with this stuff. But yeah, the diagnosis thing is I am not a neuropsych or somebody who does diagnosis. So I don't totally know in terms of like how many things that are challenging would result in a diagnosis. But
so you can have ADHD without having executive function deficits, and you can have executive function deficits and have ADHD. And so it can be like a almost, if it's a diagnosis, we call it comorbid, but if you can have one without the other. But I know every time I wrote an IEP that had ADHD on it, executive functioning skills was probably the very first area of need. Right. However, in my experience, it would not apply to everything. And this is, I don't know if we go down the path of school yet, but this is where I found teachers saying, oh, well, when we talk about this, it's fine. He gets it done. He does this and there nothing happens and it gets done on time and he can task initiate. But when he does this, oh, he never starts, or they never start, they never this, they never that. So it doesn't make sense to me. And I feel like they're just picking and choosing and being manipulative about what they can and cannot do. So can you speak to that? Because it was a big touchy point for me.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting that manipulative word comes up too. I have some parent groups too that I work with, parents of students who really struggle with this stuff. And that comes up a lot. I mean, the way I see it, a child is not being manipulative. A child is struggling in some areas and not so much in others. I mean, let's just take task initiation, the one that I mentioned, the getting started thing. The tricky thing is that students who struggle with this stuff can get started on the things they're interested in, things that they're excited about. It's the boring tasks or where there's zero interest or where they just don't want to do it that is the real challenge. And those students, when they describe to me sort of what it feels like to be stuck, like can't get started, or I know I'm like stressed out, like they describe it to me as just feeling like torture. Like it is so difficult. And so when I hear a student tell me that, to me, I understand where a teacher is coming from. I was a teacher for 14 years. I totally understand, right? Like it's difficult stuff. But if we sort of reframe it to like a what if kind of question, what if it's a lagging skill? What if?
Ooh, CPS.
Right? What if? Yeah. And then
we're talking the same language.
Okay, good. Because it is. That's what these are described as lagging skills. And in the world of ADHD, the sort of current wisdom is that a student with ADHD has a lag of 3 to 5 years in executive function. So a student might be 16 and have the executive function of like a 13 or a 12-year-old. So interesting, right? Like interesting data.
And take it home.
Totally.
Right? Take it home. My 60-year-old won't pick up this and do this and clean up this. But would you expect that if they were 11?
Right. So it's, one of the things I try to encourage parents to do, and teachers too, because I love talking to teachers, is to get curious. Like, I noticed that this happens. Like you were just saying, like the child can do this, but doesn't do this. Like, what is it about this that is challenging? Could be that they're not interested in it, but it could be more than that. And to ask lots of questions too. And no judgment. I mean, that's the hard thing. I knew we'd get to this at some point, but there's a whole lot of shame around this stuff. Why can't you? You should be able to.
And put the frame. Frame it around. And we did this forever in school when I was leading is they do well when they can. It's got nothing to do with want, because nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to piss people off. Nobody wants to push your buttons. Nobody wants that. Anybody, I don't care who you are. Adults, kids, doesn't matter. Nobody wants to. So they do well when they can. And if they can't, how do we help them?
And can we recognize that it's happening? Like noticing, right? Like getting curious.
And if we do that, now we're engaging them in that solution instead of imposing. Like I know a lot of teachers, I told them to use more white space and I told them to take extra time and I'm doing everything. But did you bring them in and say, oh, this little tweak is going to help you. Oh, helpful.
Yeah. I hear that from parents too. Like parents will say, oh, I feel like I've tried everything. And they probably have. Like they feel like they have literally tried all the things that they've been instructed to, or they've Googled or whatever. But did you try it from a lens of no shame? Did you try it from a what if, getting curious kind of thing? Did you try it? One of the big things I always talk to people about, like my biggest executive function tip, here it comes, everyone.
Yeah, do it.
Is to keep stuff in your face. Like make invisible stuff much more visible.
Yes.
So like, did you try that strategy, but put it in sight? So there's, there's just a lot of tweaks that you can do. And a lot of it is around a little bit of a reframe of how you see that student.
Yeah, absolutely. And the shame, when we talk about shame, it goes two ways. We're not shaming the person we're talking about or trying to support, but it's also, as a parent or a teacher, we feel shame that we can't help our own kid, or that we don't understand our own kid.
Yeah.
And sometimes that shame just needs to be, again, reframed into, can I collaborate with this kid to figure out what's actually going to work? And yeah, let's try one thing. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We come back. We come back and we try it again and again, because we also have to remember, and tell me how you feel about this, is if we put Band-Aid solutions on or impose these solutions, we're not fostering lifelong skills.
Right. Because this is life stuff. It's not just school stuff, right? I mean, yeah. So like, that's one of the reasons why I would never hand a kid a specific planner to say, here's the one, here's the one that will work for you, because that's just unrealistic. And that feels like a Band-Aid to me. I mean, do I love a planner? You bet I do. But there's more to it than just, it's kind of like what I was saying with, I've tried everything. I gave them a planner. But it's more to it.
Everything that would work for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Everything you see, on the internet or your friend or your teacher, that would fix it. That'll fix it.
We want a quick fix, right? Don't we? But this is just definitely not.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, you probably saw this in your work too. A student with ADHD often has a parent with ADHD. And so sometimes the parents and families that come to me are realizing, oh, it's not just my student, it's me too. And then that's tricky too, right? Like, it's difficult to be a person who struggles to help your kid who struggles. That's so hard.
And all these executive functioning skills, I feel like, could fall into any of the type of ADHD, whether it be hyperactivity or inattentive or comorbid. Like, it could absolutely, right?
Yep.
Oh, so it's so funny. I'm looking at your bio and you're a list maker, and I'm not a list maker. I am a Post-it note. I keep them in business. However, my desk gets covered. And so I work from home. Obviously, I do this all day long, and I have all these Post-it notes everywhere. Thought comes in, write it down. Thought comes in, write it down. So I've become enough aware that I won't remember in 7 seconds what idea popped in my head. Great.
Yep.
So then on Friday, I take all the Post-it notes.
What do you do with them? I'm so curious. Oh, do you crumple them up?
Shove them in a file folder to be organized into notes later. Yeah. That are probably getting moldy right now. That's how long the ideas.
That does happen sometimes. But it's not a terrible strategy. I mean, what you're describing is that, well, first of all, is one of the skills is metacognition, which is this fancy word for like kind of listening to that little voice in your head that says like, you better write it down or you'll forget it. So that's first of all, is being aware, like self-aware. And then you figure out a strategy so you won't forget it. I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's the work I do, is when I do this coaching, is that it starts with some awareness. And that's tricky sometimes because kids often don't have any awareness that it's a problem.
Well, because and some of them can't have that thought long enough to get from the start of the thought to the end of the thought.
Right.
I know. So full disclosure, I know I've been self-diagnosed ADHD for literally ever, because I'm a spec ed specialist and worked with kids forever. So I knew.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until about a year ago where it really started impacting. Like I did all the other strategies, the holistic stuff and naturopath and all of that. And it just wasn't doing it for me. And then so I did an early retirement just to do this. I want to start bringing awareness and using the podcast to do that and helping parents, which also meant I had to sit down and focus on things I can't stand doing. Tech, sitting on the computer and doing data, drafting up emails without I was known at work as like the email scanner.
There you
and
go.
I would miss like 15 points that I was supposed to address, pick up what I really wanted to put it away.
I mean,
so I wound up on medication.
Yeah.
And it has made a complete difference in my world. And I noticed it the first time I went into a staff meeting. So I've been a teacher for 28 years. So staff meetings were prevalent. And it's when I came out of the staff meeting, I realized for the very first time that I didn't doodle, fidget, or feel like I was going to throw up, or feel like I was going to fall asleep.
Yeah, it's like torture.
And the fall asleep, I'm not bored. I'm focusing so hard on trying to listen to what's happening. My body goes, "You're done."
Exhausting.
And my eyes, and it's So I don't discount medication, and I really, I talk to parents a lot about exploring.
Absolutely.
Because it is, for me, it is fuel, like just fuel, putting gas in the tank and being able to actually get something done. So
yeah.
So aside from medication, it's been good. Yeah. So aside from medication, so talk to us about, now I've only ever worked with high school students. So let's start with the teenage years.
Sure.
What kind of strategies can we offer?
I mean, I work with middle school and up, just so you know. So and parents of any age.
Perfect. Yeah.
But the skills are the same. The strategies are the same. So, you deal with them slightly differently when you're talking to a 12-year-old than you would a 17-year-old. But the one I already mentioned, which is make the invisible visible. Like there are so many things in our world that are invisible, like time, for instance, and chores, expectations at school, deadlines. It's just like floating out there. It's just totally invisible. So like whenever possible, that's probably my biggest tip, is to just keep stuff in your face, because you're way less likely to forget it if it's somewhere in sight. So that is things like I'm grabbing my analog clock that I have right here, maybe timers that you use regularly to keep track of time. Because another thing that is definitely a part of people who struggle with executive function is time blindness. Have you heard this term before?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So like not really having any idea about the passing of time, how long things take, right? So having time insight is super, super helpful. But also like your Post-it notes that you were talking about, insight. Like I guess we could talk about iPads and Chromebooks and stuff. Why don't we go there? Because here's what my students tell me is that, oh yeah, well, there's a calendar on my iPad, or there's a calendar on a Chromebook, or there's a list. Some of the programs that the kids use for school makes them a little list of their missing assignment. Well, it's on my iPad, and I say, great, but close it up, and it's totally out of sight and truly out of mind. I mean, just gone, right? So keeping things in your face. I take this from one of my students that I worked with, a middle school student. That's how he described it. In your face, Carrie, right? I'm like, yeah, in your face. It's true. It's true. I mean, I was talking to a student last night and telling him that and this stuff comes as a strength for me, but I have my challenges as well. I was telling him that I often put whatever the thing I need to remember to take out the door with me, I will often literally put it in my path. So I cannot walk there without running into it and going, oh, that's right, I need to take that with me, right? Like that's a strategy that I have used all these years. So insight, like make all that stuff more visible.
That makes so much sense. And using technology, I think, as well, not only when you close it, it's gone, But then there's the tabs.
Oh, it's it's like a slippery slope. That's what I tell students.
Yeah.
And for me too. Are you kidding? If I like had to go here and set my timer, which I often do, but oh, look, somebody texted me. Oh, check it out. Oh, that's so cute. You know,
The Netflix series. Let's go look at this.
I know.
Yes.
So, I mean, tech is great and really, really tricky, especially so for brains that struggle with this stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. What else should we talk about? Well, organization comes up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I talk to parents in particular and students too. They sort of recognize that like, whew. And I mean, there's a very, very simple rule or tip or strategy for this. Not very easy to do, but very simple. And that's just that everything needs a home. Everything needs its own predictable place where it lives. Super simple. Is it easy? No, because and we haven't talked about this yet, but all these skills are totally connected. So even the organization, like lack of having a system or understanding where your stuff is related to things like working memory, because you lay it down, but then you forget where you laid it. And then, and focus, right? Like staying focused. You weren't focused when you put it down, so you don't remember where you put, so they're all super connected, unfortunately, I suppose. But, having a home for everything, just like a kitchen has a home for everything, and a desk usually, like I've got some pens in my little cup here. And I always try to tell people, I think you mentioned this, even as just baby steps, like try something small, something's always better than nothing, but totally small, tiny progress. Pick like the most annoying thing that you keep misplacing and see if you can't figure out a home for it and convince yourself to put it there. That's where that metacognition comes in again. Self-awareness.
So let's talk about teachers.
Yes.
Putting this into place for kids. So let's clarify something first, because this is a conversation that goes back and forth in different schools. If the student is not diagnosed ADHD and this stuff is on the document, what are you saying to teachers who kids are struggling with this, but they don't have a diagnosis? Oh, no, it's not written down. I don't have to do it. What are you saying?
I say every student in your class would benefit from all this.
Yes. Yes, good teaching practice.
Good answer.
Perfect.
I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, the truth, the research out there about teachers and these skills is that they need these executive function skills have to be taught. Kids don't just kind of learn them unless they're explicitly taught. And sure, the kids that struggle with this stuff will really benefit from these skills being explicitly taught, but so will every single student in the classroom. And it will make your life easier.
And it's inclusion.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we want that, right? Yeah. It's tricky about being a teacher in a classroom of however many kids, 30 kids or 25 kids, or sometimes more, sometimes less, but it's tricky to meet all their needs, right? But some of this stuff could be built into a class, like making the invisible visible. There's a teacher that I know who decided to just super simple, put a whiteboard outside the classroom door that said whatever they needed to bring to class that day.
Nice.
So, iPad, pencil, notebook. So that even before the students got in, they could see and maybe have time to turn around and run and go get it if they forgot. But that's just one super simple way to do this in the classroom. And time, like goodness, please keep teaching time telling on an analog clock, teachers. I know we're probably not talking to too many younger grades, but I can't tell you how many of the students, older kids and adults, who say, gosh, I don't feel super comfortable telling time on an analog clock.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is never a slam to teachers, even though I'm asking you to, what do we say to teachers? God knows, like I've done it for 28 years. I think the same thing. Teachers do well when they can.
Yep.
And this is why we're giving this information. It's never a slam.
Right. No. And I'm finding that teachers are struggling with this kind of stuff. My daughter's in 5th grade and her teacher, we're talking about it pretty frequently. because gosh, and I don't know about, I'm 49, and when my teacher training this stuff didn't come up.
Oh,
right. So I'm imagining the same for you. So
yeah,
I hope I do a little early career teaching, teachers, myself. So mine get it. My students get it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know if it's in the current education for teachers. I hope so.
I think it's built in now. When I went to university, it was like 1999. Yes, I was like 12, but but no, we did nothing. So it wasn't until I actually started teaching in the classroom and became very drawn to kids who had significant needs, and then went and did my specialist, and then became the head of department because I wanted to change things in the high school and change things for the kids. And so yeah, I know teachers who have been teaching long enough. And it's funny, I said this to Stefan. We have a mutual friend, Stefan Glazer, who I said, what do you feel like when people say, oh my God, everybody has ADHD nowadays. Everybody's getting diagnosed. And I said, great.
Yeah.
I said, because now we're becoming self-aware and now we can figure it out, because kids are not moving forward after high school because they think. So let's talk post-secondary, because I think this is so important, because kids who really struggle with things we are making them do for 4 years, like you have to do math, you have to do science, like it or not, doesn't matter, you're doing it. But when you are thinking about moving beyond the high school, those 4 walls that are not always conducive to how everybody learns, thank you. But now you're choosing your courses, you're choosing everything you love, you're choosing your drive, you're choosing your purpose, hopefully. So how does that change how kids are getting into post-secondary? Like, how does that change for them?
I mean, I think the mental switch is happening. Like you said, like, okay, I'm choosing this. But I will say that I think college students are struggling too, because some of it because of COVID, maybe some of it, who knows, right? Like we could go there, but just, I don't know. Like I'm thinking of this one college student that I worked with, and he had taken a gap year, which was a great choice for him, but super self-aware, severe challenges with this stuff, but really, really, really wanted to go to university. And so, I mean, I hope those students are getting help and sticking up for their brain. That's what I talk a lot about, is like, you've got to ask for the help, like stick up for your brain. This is how your brain works.
Good. I like
ask
that.
for the help you need, right? So I hope that the students that are excited about being there will continue to be excited about being there. But I think it's still a challenge for a lot of them.
So here's where the diagnosis comes in too. My question is, post-secondary is very different. So when my students now graduate grade 12, I send them off with their IEP, and they have to have a recent psych assessment or diagnosis, medical diagnosis notation for profs or instructors to put anything into place for them.
Right.
So how are we helping those kids who have had great teachers, do great teacher practice from grade 9 to grade 12, and now, I got nothing, and I have nothing written down, and I've got a school saying, sorry, we took your tuition, but we can't help you because you don't have a diagnosis. What do we do?
I mean, I haven't come across that in my work just yet, of somebody coming to me and saying like people are unwilling to help. Because what I'm finding is that most universities have, even like we have a community college here where I live, have some sort of office of, I don't know, disability services, sometimes it's called, right? And I think there are a lot of resources for, certainly with kids that have a diagnosis. I guess they're not kids anymore once they're that age. But I still would encourage students, even if they can't get the diagnosis, or doesn't matter. I don't really care about a diagnosis, to be honest, other than like, oh, it's interesting information. But I feel like there's help available for students. So one of the things that I mean, maybe you and I are trying to do it. We have the same goal, is to empower kids to stick up for their brains, right? And be able to self-advocate, which is tricky because of the shame thing and the negativity thing and the, oh, really? But you're able to do well in that class, and, you know, that whole thing. So yeah, I don't know what to say about that, honestly, except that maybe our job is to help encourage the self-advocacy piece.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. I just did a podcast with Katie Selby, who was diagnosed when she was 6. And it wasn't until high school and she came in contact with a spec ed teacher who really started teaching her those self-advocacy skills. And she wound up going to college when she was told she was not college material.
Right.
So there are resources, there are things to do, but you're right. And I think if you happen to be that student that walks in to a college office or university office and they say, no, without paper, we can't help you, keep looking, keep asking. Yeah. Are there resources out there? I know you're a coach. Are there resources out there if kids can't afford a coach, or where can they go? Where can they look that is accessible?
I mean, I think about that a lot. So just for me and my business, I have a blog and I have an Instagram, you know, like there's lots of free resources that I have an email list where I send out tips and resources and ideas and things that are coming up in this executive function world. And so I would say, I mean, the great news is that you can Google kind of anything. Which, you know, like you can absolutely, parents, teachers can find a lot of free information about this stuff out there on the internet, which is great. It's also rather overwhelming, I'm sure, for a lot of brains. So that's often why I think people end up with me as a coach, because it just like cuts out the Googling. Like, let's just, you know, cut out that middle part. But there are tons and tons of resources out there. There's a great online magazine called Attitude. Do you know Attitude magazine?
Yeah, I've written a couple articles for them.
Oh, good. Yeah. So ADP, Attitude magazine. They do amazing work. There's another really wonderful website, and they have social media and other stuff too, called understood.org.
Okay.
Both of those have, like, if you just follow like those would be great. Or get their emails. Always have really great resources, articles for children, but also adults, ideas about self-advocacy and tips like the ones I'm giving you, all kinds of really cool things. So there's tons of places like that, but there's 2 that are really great.
That's awesome. Okay. I think I want to backpedal a little bit.
Sure.
To when I said, oh, everybody's getting diagnosed with ADHD. I want to ask you now, what does the science say about the brain with the dysfunction of executive functioning skills or the deficits or ADHD? What is the science? People aren't just saying, oh, you can't focus, you must have ADHD. What is the science there behind it?
Well, all of these skills, first of all, all those executive function skills live in the prefrontal cortex right here in the front, right behind our forehead. So that's the very last part of brains to develop, to grow. The current science says that a fully grown up brain is like around age 25 plus, sometimes even older. I mean, like with that lagging skill thing we were just talking about before with a brain with ADHD. So maybe 30 instead. Yeah. Which is older than probably even when I started teaching, you know, like it's definitely, they're learning more. The other thing I wanted to say about the science stuff is a brain with ADHD. I'm not an ADHD expert. I'm an executive function expert, but I know a lot because I have a lot of clients who have it. So I do a lot of work in that area. But the science about ADHD also says that brains with ADHD don't create as much dopamine. And dopamine is that feel-good chemical in our brains. And so that's one of the reasons why a brain with ADHD is sort of dopamine seeking, like looking for things that are interesting, that are new, that there's like, that's why when there's like a deadline and someone's very far behind, that they can hurry up and catch up because it's sort of exciting a little bit, like earning a little bit of dopamine for your brain. So in answer to your question about, I don't know if you asked me this, but about there's so many diagnoses. Everybody's getting diagnosed with ADHD. I mean, I think that's just reality. I think that it's, like you said, sort of catching up to our understanding of what ADHD is.
Yeah.
To answer your question?
Yeah, totally. And and now that you started talking about dopamine, it's bringing me down another path.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily ADHD, but when kids at 14, 15, 16 really struggle with these executive functioning skills, and we're not giving them strategies, or they're not using the strategies that are working for them, sometimes they seek outside self-medication.
For sure.
And from what I understand, because of the way the brain has not developed in a brain that has those deficits, it is a very different reaction that they're getting than a typical brain 16-year-old smokes weed compared to an atypical 16-year-old brain smokes weed. Can you speak to that? Can you speak to even just, this is how important it is that we put things in place?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the science behind what you're talking about in terms of a more neurotypical and a neurodiverse brain. But I do know that teaching these skills, even before, if possible, 14, 15, 16 years old, can really lead to success in school. And sure, I mean, are they going to try other things? Maybe, I don't know, probably teenagers do that, right?
Yeah.
But however, on the flip side of that, when a parent comes to me with a 19-year-old, or a 19-year-old comes to me, or a 17, whatever it is, older than that, I always say it's a great time to start learning these skills, because what's the alternative, right? Like, sure, you didn't get instruction or didn't learn some of these things when you were in middle and high school. Okay, well, great, let's get started. And the brain science about that is very clear, that this new term out there called neuroplasticity, like brains can change into adulthood, right? Like, this is not something that we should be afraid to start because, like, I'm too old, or no, absolutely. I mean, the science is clear.
Good point. Yeah. So, and here's me. I should have written this down on a Post-it note.
I love it.
So I'm going to say now, as we're starting to wrap up, if a parent is starting to be concerned, what signs are they looking for before they say, "Oh, I need someone like Carrie," or "I need some intervention here and some support"? So the teacher's phoning home and they're saying, what are they saying?
Yeah, I mean, the teacher might say, so many missing assignments. I hear that a lot, right? Like, I thought they were working on this in class and then it didn't get turned in, or just lots and lots of missing assignments. Messy desk or backpack, or that kind of thing. Really, sometimes disruptive in class because they can't focus. You and I know they can't focus, and the thing is boring, so they're having a hard time doing it, or whatever the things are. So they move to distracting the other kids. But I hear about home stuff too. So the bedroom is rushing to get out the door every single day. Can't manage emotions. We didn't even get to that yet, but like the emotional control piece is part of this too. That's executive function too. And impulsive behavior. So, it's all those types of things that sort of, and, I do some parent presentations locally, but sometimes online too, and in these podcasts, but sometimes it's a little aha moment from parents and teachers who are in the room, because because again, like, they don't know this term. A lot of people don't know what this thing is, that it's even a real thing. And so that little aha, oh yeah, that sounds like my student. Oh yeah. Huh. And then some of them, that sounds like me too. But yeah, so it's just a whole lot of things adding up, like kind of compounding, like just stacking on one another. And the student is probably stressed about it. Not always. Sometimes the student pretends they don't care. But like you said, the child would do better if the child could do better. So sometimes there's a lot of tears and anger and that sort of thing at home. So to have some strategies to use sometimes not eliminates entirely, but can reduce that significantly.
So say more about emotional regulation.
Oh man, that's so tricky, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh my God.
I think well, a lot of it's developmental, right? Like just like all these skills, by the way, that we talked about, age 25 is when the brain is fully developed. So like a lot of these things will get better as a student ages. But yeah, the emotional thing is so tricky. The current, I don't know, strategies out there to help with emotional regulation really are preemptive. Like once a student is having a big emotional reaction, that is absolutely not the time to try anything.
No.
Except maybe step back, maybe lower your voice, maybe, do those types of things. But the preemptive stuff is things like connection, like spending time with your student, your kid, like having connection as a parent and a child. Food, exercise, sleep. I always talk about too, like nutrition, exercise, sleep, all that stuff is critical for brains and bodies. But yeah, the emotional regulation piece requires metacognition, being aware that, oh, I'm starting to feel kind of hot. Oh gosh, I really, whatever the feelings are, like being able to name what's happening, and then maybe a strategy or two in the middle of it. You can teach some breathing exercises or stepping outside. Here's another great thing too, is for adults in students' lives to talk about how they deal with stress is so helpful, like narrating it. I'm feeling pretty mad right now, so I'm going to step outside. I will be right back after a few breaths, whatever it is. Right? Naming it, saying it out loud.
We would number it.
Oh, I would
talk to students about like, okay, number 1, you're so happy you just opened all the Christmas presents that you wanted.
Yes.
Number 5, you're feeling a little batshit crazy. So can we start recognizing, my stomach's feeling a little tight, or, like your heart starts racing, my palms are sweating, that sort of thing. And again, when I think about emotional outbursts, and the word behavior makes me crazy, because it's never the behavior. We have to get this through to people. It's never the behavior. It is a communication to say, I can't do what you want me to do. And as they get to be teenagers, not only can I not do what you want me to do, I know I can't. And all my friends are sitting around me and they all can, and I can't. So am I going to throw a chair? Damn right I am. So if we can step back and go, this has nothing to do with me. And it's because this poor kid, like our nonverbal kids on the spectrum, right? They've got an itchy tag. Well, for me, I can pull it out and I can cut it, but it would drive me crazy before that. But these poor kids, they're hungry, they're thirsty, they're cold, whatever, but it's just something they can't say. And we have to put that lens on and say, nobody wants to do this in the classroom. No kid wants to have an outburst like this. And so we've got to change this. Just wants to push my buttons, just wants an excuse to get out of the class. We need to really put a different lens on.
I have a friend who is a coach in this sort of space, and she calls them behavioral symptoms, not behaviors. Challenging behavioral symptoms because of the lagging skills, right? I had one student, I'll never forget this conversation, and that was probably 6 years ago. And he was on the spectrum and had some very, very loud verbal outbursts that were, included some choice language. And he was a big boy, so very, intimidating. So if he could make it to my office, he did. And he would shut the door and he would just do whatever. My hair was blowing back in my face. He was yelling, but okay, get it out. But I asked him one day when it was finished and he was feeling better. I said, can you describe to me what it feels like in your body when you hit 5? And he said, yeah. He said, I feel like there is a wall of flames right in front of my face. And I went, how does anybody function like that? Right.
How can anybody say he just wanted to get out of math, so this is what he did?
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
So
It's like I was
think
talking about
that
like
all the
feeling like
time.
torture, right? Like
Yeah.
it feels like torture. Yeah.
Yeah. I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
And it takes, sometimes it takes that. We all need connection. We all need empathy. And that would be the first thing I would say to him is that must be horrible. Like that must be the worst feeling. Like repeat back to the kids,
Yes.
oh, it must be so hard to watch everybody focus on math or do this. It must be hard. Like, how can I help? Whatever. But empathy goes a long way.
Sure does.
At home, in the classroom,
Sure does.
with the principal. It goes a long way.
Yeah.
Nothing like feeling heard and seen as a human being, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And I tell families all the time too, like the most important thing is connection with your kid. It's not home, but it's not worth having explosions about homework or chores or
bingo. Bingo. Yeah, 100%. I used to even say to the parents, leave the homework. It's not that important. It's not that important. Like put your priorities in your brain and go from there, because they've held it together from 8 till 3. Like just held it together. They at home, and now you want them to no, that's not. Yeah. But again, it's a shame of a parent feeling like, oh, I have to go tell the teacher that my kid didn't do their homework.
Yeah.
So again, right, it's switching things around in our perception.
Yeah. Sure is a lot to talk about, huh?
Oh my goodness. I feel like, right, we could do like 10 more episodes. So let me ask you then, before we go, where can people find you? How can people work with you? All of that.
I have a website. It's just my name. So it's just carriebonnett.com, CarrieBonnett. So that's where all the things are. And then I have a free resource too for sort of, I call it get the brain on board, sort of some intro strategies and some information and language to use with kind of like what we talked about here. But, and that's just Carrie Bonnett /blueprint. I call it my quick start blueprint to help your student.
Amazing. I love it.
I'm on Instagram, but that's all on my website. So
yeah. And for all of those people who will forget that information, I'm going to put it in the show notes. Carrie, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This has been wonderful. I appreciate you and all the work you're doing, making kids feel heard and seen, and the strategies in place, and it's good work. So thank you.
You're welcome. It was so nice talking to you.
And thank you for listening to Teen Minds Redefined. Don't forget, it's really important that you share and subscribe and download so everybody gets to hear this information. Don't keep this important gold nugget to yourself. Share it with the world. Thank you. And thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.